Okay, so it appears as though this information really has to get out there so that we can actually make a start and get this conversation going. The second part is about why I think art, aka our creative expression, forms the dialogue that is the creative process for carrying us forward into making our dream come closer. So, in the last video, I gave you a definition, keyword proposed definition. So, feel free to collaborate on interrogating it. Where natural resources and land are predominantly controlled and restricted by profit and power motives, we need spaces where the law of private ownership does not apply. Spaces which are reserved for the use of and benefit of the collective. A proposed definition. The common is a shared or communal space. It's used and repurposed by a community for the benefit of the collective. A space in which people have an equal right to resources and an equal right to participate. The law of private ownership does not apply. Commoners are recognised as guardians and are responsible to ensure the common resources remain accessible and sustainable for continued use by the collective. So obviously this needs a lot of discussion about what this actually means, and I mean, I give this over to you. Let's talk and see, because it's only through the dialogue that we can move forward together. If this is something that you feel also needs to exist in the world for whatever reason, and yeah, so part 2, proposing art as the common. This is how I see art. Art is an accessible space with the capacity to accommodate collective experiences that are not limited by the constraints of the socio-economic system. I acknowledge that the art world and its institutions are not wholly free from the politics of our social systems. But by art I refer not to the collectible and celebrated objects in museums, galleries and popular narratives, but simply the power to create within us all. I posit that art, the common, is an intellectual space you inhabit where you are thinking about art and having a dialogue through art. If you are further down the road, like I am now, seeing I wrote this in 2015, it might be more than an intellectual space to you. It might be a liminal space, or a mindset that actually enables you to live the art, be the art, enact the dialogue, perform the art, and in so doing bring into the world an expression and be the bridge between what was a moment ago and what comes after now, which is not something that anybody has control over, which is why you need the collective dialogue rather than one editor. So, even without physical space, in the mind of the artist and in the dialogue between people who recognise their creative power, this alternative narrative and alternative common space exists. So in the media, in our cultures, there is always a dominant, pervasive narrative. And that particular narrative, especially in the media, usually is controlled by power players. And certainly on an individual basis, our personal narrative. Ooh. Maybe to be discussed. Yes. Oh, okay. So, I posit that art, the common, is an intellectual space you inhabit where you are thinking about art and having a dialogue through art. Even without physical space, in the mind of the artist and in the dialogue between people who recognise their creative power, this alternative narrative and alternative common space exists. I conclude that no matter how many controls or constraints are placed on our freedoms, we will always have this. Art can act as the last common if all else is stripped from us. Art has long been recognised as existing outside of or in parallel to the status quo, allowing an artist to act as a commentator and their work to critique the lived experience. This allows for freedom of exploration, rule-breaking, questioning and alternative ideas that have no room to breathe within the environments that control and restrict movement and self-expression. So you may not be able to relate to this. I know that the sense of art and creativity have been inhibited and stamped out for a lot of people. For me, art kept me sane, it kept me connected to the more than intellectual, rational, logical Western mind. And for me, when I feel like change is not possible, when things are stuck, when I don't know what to do, when I am inhibited by what I think should be happening or what should work or what the rules of the game are or the context in which something is happening, the role that I am playing. If I go back to I am an artist, this is art, then anything is possible. It's an exploration. You try things out, you use a bit of intuition. You don't necessarily know where you're going, but it will make sense in the end. There's a whole different realm of creative process that can be applied to living life. So the corresponding myth that art does not belong to the real world and lives outside and disconnected from everyday life is unhelpfully pernicious and disempowering. So this is a quote from Art is Experience, the book by John Dewey. He says, "Our present museums and galleries, to which works of fine art are removed and stored, illustrate some of the causes that have operated to segregate art instead of finding it an attendant of temple, forum, and other forms of associated life." I continue. "There is a resulting misconception that art is not for everyone, that some people are not creative or cultured enough to understand or contribute, but consider a person who dismisses art as irrelevant and incomprehensible. When exposed to art, the person will disown it. He or she will get angry when it strikes them as meaningless or irrelevant, because even a non-artist knows that art is supposed to mean something. They look for relevance in public art and get upset if it proclaims to be for them but does not connect with them or to them in any way. This anger at feeling displaced from public art is akin to the anger at feeling displaced from land and natural environments we can call our own. It's grounded in what we know to be true, but don't see reflected in the society that was built around us. The idea of art as an exchange or dialogue between artists and the people experiencing their artwork is not new. Even in a white-walled exhibition, art is still an exchange, a dialogue not in words, an experience that touches the audience in some way." Nicolas Bourriard, if I say that correctly, and I think it's Nicolas, wrote in the 90s in Relational Aesthetics, "What is collapsing before our very eyes is nothing other than the falsely aristocratic conception of the arrangement of works of art, associated with the feeling of territorial acquisition. In other words, it is no longer possible to regard contemporary work as space to be walked through, the owner's tour akin to the collector's. It is henceforth presented as a period of time to be lived through, like an opening to unlimited discussion, an art form where the substrate is formed by an intersubjectivity, and which takes being together as a central theme, the encounter between beholder and picture, and the collective elaboration of meaning. Bourriade wrote this in the 90s, a virtual pre-internet era. He spoke of this evolution toward relational art as being a result of an emergent worldwide urban culture, that is, the general growth of towns and cities which gave rise not only to an extraordinary upsurge of social exchanges, but also to much greater social mobility through the development of networks and roads and telecommunications. So this was written before the internet, and obviously this is even more true now. The continued rise of connectivity, this is me now, through broadband and the internet gives us a greater awareness of global connections and conversations taking place. Twitter, running adjunct to the traditional press, adds an informal public discourse. Through all of these things, more people have become aware that our everyday reality is not represented in mainstream press, that there is a media bubble pushing political rhetoric and hidden agendas. It's just got worse, right? However, art as a form of dialogue is perfect for connecting people to alternative ideas and experiences. We do not make art in a vacuum. Whatever our interests, we are informed by the world and inform the world. The experience of art is a happening moment in which the art comes alive, imbued with a new and deeper layer of meanings as people interpret and comprehend meaning. I thought John Dewey said this well when he said, "To perceive, a beholder must create his own experience. Without an act of recreation, the object is not perceived as a work of art. The artist selected, simplified, clarified, abridged, and condensed according to his interest. The beholder must go through these operations according to his point of view and interest. In both, an act of abstraction takes place for both the artist and the beholder. That is an extraction of what is significant takes place. In both, there is comprehension in its literal signification, that is, a gathering together of details and particulars physically scattered into an experienced whole." So, art is a dialogue we have with ourselves as we make it, and with the world as it is received. The response from the world is not always documented or officially made part of the art, but the response attributes value and meaning to the art in the moment of experiencing. If a conclusion is reached, it is that of a movement of anticipation and culmination, one that finally comes to completion. A conclusion is no separate and independent thing, it is a consummation of movement, says Dewey. So in this light, the physical, emotional, intellectual response to the aesthetic experience are all an integral part of the conversation that is art. It is in this moment of encounter that art can act as a catalyst for change. The majority of artists, perhaps all artists, strive to make some kind of impression with their work. The finished work, as in painting or sculpture, is gifted to the world for people to experience. The participatory work engages people in a more explicit and often co-creative way. Even the solitary art practice leaves an impression on the artist as the artist makes an impression on his or her material. In the process of making, an artist orders his or her material toward a conclusion. We have an experience when the material runs its course to fulfillment. This is Dewey. We have an experience when the material runs its course to fulfillment. Flow is from something to something. The perceived experience of the artist developing their idea informs the energy and form of the finished work. At each stage of development, the work simultaneously sums up what preceded it and evokes what is to come, for with every closure there is an awakening in perception. When art succeeds, it can be a mind-opening, heart-expanding experience. The perceived division between the artist and the artwork, the process and the form, disappears when you see art as an ongoing dialogue, as artists live and respond to life, and people experience and respond to their work. The art dialogue is the wider sea in which individual artists work. It is this ongoing dialogue that I think of as the common, the accessible co-creative space in which anyone can participate. It has no home other than in our work, no fixed location other than in the exchange, the moment of encounter. So imagine now how powerful it would be for people to realise they can be, active contributors to a wider conversation. The conversation that is not limited to the agenda and assumptions of our current systems. This is the dialogue of art. I conclude that the cultivation of an art practice, art experiences and art dialogue is a way of accessing the common space that is ours. Within this space, there is the possibility to open your mind to alternatives that inspire other people to see things differently. Perhaps art is the ultimate assertion of freedom. Within art, the common, your power to create and contribute is indisputable. Claim it, use it, be the artist you were born to be. And I am absolutely serious and as passionate as that sounds. And for the last 5 years I have been exploring this. What it is to make art a dialogue. And I've also realised that I really need conversation. I always have needed people to keep to it, like, at first it was emails, now it's like messages, but all my life my creative process, my thinking process has been energized and renewed by the stream of sharing and the undercurrent of conversation of other people who are also exploring, creating, learning, growing, and reflecting and making conscious what is happening in the relationship and in the conversation, and taking responsibility for what we are co-creating. I went on to I've got so much to talk about around this. It's so exciting. So what I want you to do is write down anything that's come up from you. Sorry, not from you. Yes, from you. Anything that's come up from you while you have been listening to me or reading the document. And I'd like you to share them with me, and then I can put together a structure for a collective Zoom chat discussion and dialogue. And if you would like to contribute in some way to hosting the event, either as a technical help or holding the space or chairing the discussion or whatever, that would be most welcome. Please let me know. And yeah, I'm going to set a date today for the event, and yeah, the reason the reason is obvious why I want to talk, but I think it's worth saying that I've always been interested in the how, and I've spent a lot of time on the how, the dialogue, the dialogic aspect of it, the community, the coming together. And I'm so ready. It's only now that I get to the point where it's like, oh, this is like, I haven't rewritten my artist statement yet, but this is like an integral part of my practice. It's about the dialogue. But the first part, the part about actually building something through conversation that does challenge something so fundamental as our relationship to the land, which is a complicated statement, saying our and referring to every human on the planet. Obviously we don't all have the same relationship, but there is a dominant culture now that globally is in force regardless of the personal experience. So let's come together individually and personally and contribute to the whole that we experience in the future, whatever that may be.